parables. There's a third parable here in the chapter. One is the parable of the bridesmaids that we looked at last week, and this one being the parable of the talents. The two parables stand for us. What book did I tell you? Okay. Matthew 25. Thanks for that. And yeah, it's possible I said it so fast that even I didn't know what I told you. The parable of the talents, compared and contrasted with the previous parable, can, if we're not careful, it's a bit confused over what are we to do for the end times. Are we to wait preparedly, work and accomplish? Because the two parables, at the end of the conclusion of them, are speaking of what to do in regards to the unknown moment of the Lord's return, but specifically then what do we do in the meantime? Remember with the parable of the bridesmaids that they come prepared and they wait. So does the Christian come prepared and just waits until the Lord returns? And that in the contract of talents, where the king or the Lord, the master, gives instructions to his servants and says, I'm going on a journey. When I return, he doesn't tell them when he's coming back. He says, in essence, when I return, we'll settle up the accounts and see where things lie. And he addresses them when he returns according to their working. So not their waiting, but their diligent working. So we have a touch of a contrast. It's not too much for us to overcome, and it's not a contradiction. It's just the benefit of the parable. Again, sometimes the parables interlink and are beneficial to each other, and sometimes because they're parables, they're stories, if we try to make them fit, they just don't fit together. How do you take the principle of this parable and match it up with the principle of this parable? When you do so, they will come back appearing to have conflicting principles. So we treat them as independent. We treat them in connection to the setting, the settings around them, the audience of the parables. Remember that the overwhelming majority of the parables, the primary audience is who? The disciples. The closer body of followers of the Lord Jesus Christ. And we know in most cases, again, not in all, some cases are kept with the intimate 12, and the teaching of the parable is just for them, and they're the only ones hearing it. In the parables, there's a peripheral audience that's listening as well. There is a common statement that Jesus makes when he's addressing a larger crowd, that is, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Let him see and let him understand these things. Part of his drawing of the net to those who are listening, who are not of the close followers of the Lord Jesus Christ. Keep in mind, one of the followers of the Lord Jesus Christ proves to be a traitor. It doesn't mean that the teachings were not for Judas. Hearing these parables, he's a part of that intimate crowd that's hearing them, perhaps being confused and irritated, much like the Pharisees are of the day. But don't miss that he's hearing these parables as well, and he's hearing Jesus's explanations to them. He's on a hearing side of this that's unlike the rest of the disciples. From time to time, the disciples appear to be very confused. We don't get it. Give us more explanation to it. And so on a few occasions, we have the extended of who the characters are and what they represent, but we don't for the majority of them. Most of the parables that we have recorded in Scripture are just a story. It does seem, I think, in full disclosure, I think that there are some portions of this parable that we misapply unintentionally. I don't think that there's intent of the church to ever apply intentionally wrongly a parable or make application to it in a deceiving or misleading way. But it has, because of the word talent, it lends itself And I think you probably already understand some of that. Some of it we have a language issue. We have a money exchange issue that we are completely unfamiliar with. And we don't talk about money in the sense of talents. When we talk about talents, we start talking about skill. We start talking about ability. There's addressability in the parable, but that's not what a talent is. So we'll work our way. So Jesus has just finished the teaching from Matthew's record here in the 25th chapter, from verse 13 to verse 14. There is no narrative. There's no indication that the time has moved from the end of this story to the start of this story. We don't have any narrative. One day and this is another day. The narrative lends itself that almost as soon as Jesus has finished the teaching of the parable of the bridesmaids, that he moves directly into the teaching of the parable of the talents. And so that's we'll take the narrative, the gap in the narrative, if you will, or the lack of information in the narrative, and also because we're on a close proximity to the end of Jesus' days, so we know that weeks haven't gone by here. Near proximity of his death. And so it's likely that this is a transition. I finished telling this story. Now I'm here for this story in verse 14. So let's read the text, beginning in the 14th verse, all the way through to verse 30. For it is just like a man go on a journey, who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. He gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability. And he went on his journey. Immediately, the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. In the same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents. But the one who received 1 talent went away and dug a hole in the ground and hid it. He hid his master's money. Verse 19. Now after a long time, the master of the slaves came and settled accounts with him. The one who had received the 5 talents gave up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I have gained 5 more talents. And the master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. Faithful with a few things, I will put in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Who had received the 2 talents came up and said, Master, you entrusted 2 talents with me. See, I have gained 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy. And the one also who had received the 1 talent came up and said, Master, I knew you were a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid, went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, what is yours? The master answered and said to him, You wicked, lazy slave. I reap where I did not sow and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore, take from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. Who has more than he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness, into the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Quite a story. This is right on the tail end of the 10 bridesmaids. You remember in the story of 10 bridesmaids, how many faithful, prepared bridesmaids were there? 5. And how many unfaithful, unprepared bridesmaids were there? What happened to the 5 unfaithful, unprepared bridesmaids? First of all, what did they do? What? Hey, we're going to run out of oil. And they asked for oil. The faithful slaves, the faithful bridesmaids say, what? No, go get your own. Go to the market, buy your own. It's too close. You do better. You put the information that you need to know prepared to wait. So they go to the town, they buy more oil, they come back, and what's happened when they come back? The marriage feast has begun. And in the custom, the doors have been shut. Nobody's allowed to come in. They knock on the door and they say with a loud voice, Lord, Lord, let us in. The house come and say to them, I don't even know you. Yeah. So right off of that telling, you have Jesus' words in verse 13, to be on the alert then, for you do not know the day nor the hour. And then he breaks into this story. Without giving any more information or any more dialogue about the previous, he just moves along. About a man who's apparently wealthy, know much more. There are some comparative parables. Luke chapter 19, we're not going to look at it, but it's not the same parable, but it's a similar parable where the master there in Luke chapter 19, he too goes on a trip, and there's no indication of when he's going to return. But when you read the two from chapter 19 of Luke with Matthew 25, it's clearly not the same parable, but a similar principle. And the king, the Lord, the master, he's going to go on a journey. And so he goes to his slaves that he trusts, that he trusted to them his possessions. This again, I think, is helpful if we understand the practice of the day. This is a very, very common practice, that if the master or the landlord, the owner of a vast pieces of property, from time to time he would do this, and he would come to his slaves, he would come to his family, he would come to his slaves, and he would entrust them with his possessions while he was going to be away. And he would expect them to take care of things. He would expect them to work while he was away. Now, in the parable in Luke, we learn of the master or the king who comes back and they've mistreated his son. So it's a lot more detail in that particular encounter in Luke chapter 19. He comes to his slaves and he says to these 3 slaves, go on a journey, and I'm going to be gone. He doesn't tell them how long. He just says he's about to go on a journey. It's down a little bit. It's a talent. Here's a money exchange, and if you have a good student Bible or a study Bible, there's probably a footnote somewhere there indicating what a talent would represent. It's hard to make it across the board, dollar for dollar exchange. But I think in best case scenarios, we're talking that a talent is equivalent to $1,000. Where it gets messy is, how does that relate to inflation and time that has gone since this time? If we were to make a dollar talent would be equivalent to $1,000. $1,000 today is different than $1,000 50 years ago. $1,000 today is different than 100 years ago. So the inflation or the change of the value of the money is a little bit more complicated. It's probably $1,000 would be a significant amount of money. You do this a dollar for dollar exchange, and they well, what kind of a man was this that he gives $5,000 to this guy, $2,000 to that guy, $1,000 to that guy? Well, I mean, at some point I said, oh, well, that's a lot of money. But compare him to a businessman today who owns lots of property, has lots of people who work for him. That's not a lot of money. Possessions. But we'll make the understanding this is a significant. He's trusting with these slaves. You're not bothered by the master and slave issue, are you? I think sometimes in our English context, in our American context at that, the language of the Bible can be a very disturbing and misdirecting problem for us. We were to capture to help us in our journey with the Lord. One thing that Alex, the director of New Horizon Home, has taught me over the years is that he usually, somewhere in our correspondence, will say, sign his name, Alex, servant of the Lord, Alex, slave of God. And it's been a rich thing for me to learn, to consider myself a slave of God. We're like that. Because there's been a lot of bad things that have, I understand why we don't like the word slave, but I would say to us, let's embrace the language of the Bible and understand what it's saying. So we have this master who comes to his slaves, and he said to the first one, he's going to give him 5 talents, so that's $5,000. In his day, that's a large sum of money. And who gives that kind of money to a slave? Well, and with your possessions, you give it to him. So to another, he gives 2 talents or $2,000. And to another, he's given him 1 talent, each according to his own ability. He went on his journey. Notice verse 16. Now, from the New American Standard, it may be different. What is the first word in verse 16? Immediately. The narrative here is that the master has given the money and he's gone on his journey. Then this slave does this immediately. He's off to work. He doesn't say, oh, isn't it good that the master's gone? Let's take a break. Orders a day off for everybody. No, immediately, the next thing that he does is he takes those 5 talents that his master gave to him, and he went to the market and he began to trade best. He began to do things that would bring back a reward. And he says that he gained 5 more talents. Now, we don't know that he gained the 5 talents immediately. We just know that he went to work immediately. We know that he, as soon as his master is turned and walking away, the slave has gone to work. Verse 17, in the same manner, so in the same manner, meaning immediately, or in the same understanding, the one who had received 2 talents gained 2 more. But the one who had received the 1 talent went away. And I think we should imply, from the way the narrative is reading here, he immediately has gone away. And he dug a hole in the ground, and he hid his master's money. I see through the parable, I think it's important that we understand what the parable is not doing. That's, as many times as you understand this, that's more helpful sometimes to help us understand what it is saying. This is not a parable to speak to financial matters. This is not where we get financial principles from. This is a common understanding. We do get benefit from it because that's the common practice of the day. Gain from it. But the main teaching of this parable is not wise financial investment. It is not in the financial realm. It's just using a wise financial person, a smart, effective person with money, and we can learn things from them, but that's not the primary part of the parable here. So in the same way, all 3 of these masters, as soon as all 3 of the slaves, as soon as the master is left, they go to work. And so verse 19 gives us a time factor here. How long since the master has left does he return? How long? Maybe 20. Could 5 years be a long time? Depends on what those 5 years were like. Could be a year. And you've gone through a long year before, haven't you? Good. They go quickly now, don't they? After a long time, the master of these slaves came and settled accounts with him. Let's use verse 19. And we probably got a King James, we probably got an NIV, we probably have a Holman SB in the house.
NIV, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them.
ESV has, now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts.
It reads almost word for word. Does anyone have the Holman?
After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts.
All right, there's some plagiarism going on, isn't there? I expected the Holman because I thought I read it that it helped us with something, but I'm guessing I'm thinking of another verse.
What is your translation?
This is said that he came after a long time. The master of those slaves came and settled accounts. Does anyone have the King James?
I have
After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with him.
Definitely plagiarism going on in the translation.
What is your translation?
New American Standard. Okay, I'm clearly at a loss for words because I thought I had something that would be helpful for us. You get the idea, don't you, though? After a long time, the master of those slaves came.
You're saying slaves and these are saying servants.
After a long time, the master of those slaves.
These other translations say servants instead of slaves, I believe, most of them.
Oh yeah, well, so their term is using servant versus slave.
The guy scripted himself to a master. It wasn't something where he just captured him and took him with him.
Yeah, there's a combination, and which is something that gets lost in the conversation of ownership of people from the timeline here. Is that God gives clear instructions to the children of Israel, and he essentially says, when you own slaves, it's very uncomfortable language, but God tells his people, you treat slaves different. You don't treat them as simple property. They are people, and you treat them as such. And so that brings up the idea of a bondservant. Perhaps he's either earned his freedom or someone's purchased it for him, or even his master has come to a position where he says, I can't do this anymore. And he sets him free. And that individual says, oh, but I don't want to go anywhere but here. So he's a bondservant. He's voluntary in that position. We don't know, is that the case with these three guys or not? There's certainly a lot of liberty that this master has given to his slaves to entrust them with this kind of responsibility.
One does put a bullet by the word slaves.
Puts a bullet, does it give it a definition or an explanation? So what does it say?
It says the strong Greek word cannot be accurately translated in English by servant or bondservant. The HCSB translates this word as slave, not out of insensitivity to the legitimate concerns of modern English speakers, but out of the commitment to accurately convey the brutal reality of the Roman Empire's inhumane institution as well as the ownership called for by Christ.
Okay, that was what I was, I had connected more of what it says about the word than the word itself. So
we couldn't hear that.
you couldn't hear that. Can you read it a little bit louder?
doulos cannot be accurately judged by servant or bondservant. The Holman translates this word as slave, not out of insensitivity to the legitimate concerns of modern English speakers, but out of a commitment to accurately convey the brutal reality of the Roman Empire's inhumane institution, as well as the ownership called for by Christ.
All right. Essentially, it is this, that the New Testament is not being politically insensitive to call these individuals slaves. And so it's probably not near as necessary for us to be reminded of that as it would be if we don't come to it with an understanding that this is the biblical language. So I did want that to come out, and it just took me a while to get it out because I forgot about the bullet point to the Holman. That was where it was. I just had forgotten. Thank you. So after a long time, so all of that to say, it took a long time for the master to come back. Slaves to him, and he settles the accounts with them. So we have the one who had received the 5 talents or $5,000. He came up and he brought 5 more talents. And notice that it's the slave who is addressing the slave master. He's addressing his master, and he's the one who's saying, "Master, you entrusted me with 5 talents. Gained 5 more talents." Relationship of a slave who's afraid of his master. We're going to get to the guy who's afraid of his master in a moment. But this guy, he's thankful to see his master. He's grateful. He's excited. He can't wait to tell him about what he's been able to do with what his master has trusted him with. The same thing happens with the other servant, the second servant. His master said to him, so after verse 20, after the slave says this to his master, the master says to him, "Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I put you in charge of many things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy." He'll say this to the second master, to the second slave as well. Word for word, the same accolades. He's giving him a verbal reward. He's appreciative of the work that he's done, and he's calling him a faithful, good and faithful. I've put you in charge of this, and now I can now come and enter into the joy of your master. So that's the same case, verse 22 and 23, or essentially the same things being said and the same response being given. It's when we get to verse 24, that the one who also had received the 1 talent came up. Notice it's almost as though he's expecting to be rewarded, because he does approach the slave master. He addresses him slightly differently, and you can tell his demeanor by the narrative is he's coming with a different approach of things. So the one who had received the 1 talent, he came up and he said, "I knew that you were a hard man. Not so, and gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid and went away and hid your talent in the ground." See? It's almost as though he's expecting, pleased with what he's done. That he's taken what the master entrusted him with, and he's brought him back the very same thing that he gave him. But the reaction of the master is quickly telling in verse 26. The narrative doesn't mince any words, and it gets straight to the point. The master answered and said to him, "You wicked slave, you knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather." Let's stop for just a minute. That phrase, this third servant says it to the master. "I know this about you. You reap where you don't sow, and you gather where you didn't sow, where you didn't spread seed." And Jesus is saying, "You knew this about me, and you still did this." What do you think that is implying? What's the there? I knew you were a hard master, and I knew you reap where you don't sow, where you didn't spread.
Well, he insulted his master.
He has insulted his master for taking what he entrusted him and went and dug a hole and put it in the ground.
So it touches on his concept of God, right? God. For reward, the faith that God likes is the faith that believes that God is and is a rewarder for those who diligently seek him. Contrast their attitude. Also, I thought about Hebrews 10:38 that says, the just shall live by faith, but if any man draws back, pleasure in him. Identifies that situation, I think, in some respect.
Where it explains his response, his reaction to the slave. You wicked, lazy. He calls him lazy, which means he did not go to work. He did not perform his duties.
The master gave the amounts of money according to what he thought their abilities were. Obviously, he was right about this.
He didn't trust him with a lot.
Also, if you take that idea and applies it to ourselves, there's risk in serving the Lord. You've got to take a risk, which is what the other two people did. He didn't want to risk anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Think of it in this manner. I think this will be helpful. You think he did with the tapes. He gave trusted resources to do what? To go to work, to go and bring back a increase. And so the master's not the one who's actually doing the scattering and the sowing of the seed, but his charge to them to do the duty of sowing, reaping, comes back to him through their work. So he's not the one directly. He himself, he's given charge to his servants to go and do this. Dave comes back and doesn't do that. It's as though the master saying, you knew that I gave you these things to go out and to work. And you knew that when I came back, I would expect more than what I gave you. It'd have been better for you, you wicked, lazy slave, had you gone to the bank and put it in the bank. So I could have got not only my money back, but I could have even received more back. Even if the interest rates are miserable. That'd have been better than burying it in a hole by a tree marked with an X. That's, you know this, that I reap where I don't sow. I gather where I have not spread and scattered the seed. The slave says, I was afraid. Notice there's a difference in fearing God and being afraid. Passing, that's noted. Just to make note of this. This master, this slave has conjured up in his mind, this master is hard and he's difficult to please. And so because of that, he creates an idea in his mind that he's afraid of him. When he comes back, how's he going to treat him? If he takes this work and he goes out and does work with what the master is entrusted to, I haven't done anything. And he comes back and I've lost money. I'm afraid of what he's going to do to me. So I'd rather go bury it in a hole in the ground than take a risk. I don't think risk taking is the primary point of the parable. I think it would be, but it is it's part in play. The individuals are all notably what they're about to go do with what the master has asked them to do.
Is it trust? Trust we're talking about?
I think there would be an element of trust here. Yeah.
The other guys probably knew that he would be fair with them, no matter how much they brought back.
Yeah.
This guy.
So the master's reaction, you wicked, lazy slave, you knew that I reap where I did not sow, and that I gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put the money in the bank. On my arrival, I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore, take away the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. The principle here, the primary For to everyone who has, more will be given. Also completely rapes this text. Okay? And I apologize for using the word rape, but it's exactly what they do. Everyone who has, more will be given to them. And he who has in abundance, but from the one who does not have, even what he does have, shall be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness, in the place where there is weeping. Eve. Well, we have at least a couple of things to settle in the observation of the text. All three of the individuals are known to the master as slaves. They're his slaves. They're given instructions. They are given different amounts of money. And again, this is not about money. It's not about increase of money. And it's not a guarantee that if you go and take this money, that there will be a promise of reward in the future with the money. That's what the prosperity gospel does with this text. And it's a complete misapplication of it. We know this text is about the kingdom of heaven. And that's his primary duty. We know that from chapter 25, verse 1. Jesus is teaching about the kingdom that is to come, the kingdom of heaven. And so in this, all so you see the story in its totality there. We have the characters of the story. There's 3 slaves and 1 master. There's 4 primary characters in the story. The master, the landowner, the king, if you will, he has given instructions that he's going to be gone on a journey, and the slaves do not know when he will return. And I think Jesus is doing this on purpose. They believe it with an unknown number of days. He says when he returns from a long journey. It's gone a long time. Master returns. And in the meantime, there is an immediate work that God's expecting his disciples to get to the task. Is the task investment of money? Accumulation of wealth? As some would purport and preach. No, it's the kingdom, it's the work. Paul to the church in Galatia talks about reaping what we sow. He's not meaning that if we invest money in safe and secure stocks and bonds, we should expect a safe and return reward of that. So immediately to work, immediately to the task. The master is gone. We don't know when he's coming back. To the work we must go. Put the hand to the plow. Tell me to put my nose to the plow. It's a hand to the plow. We get to the duty. We get to the work. We don't stop in process. We invest in the kingdom of heaven. We invest our, careful here, what?
Abilities.
Careful in that. Who gave talents, the money? Let's word to. Who does the giving of the gift? Did the slaves have anything of themselves to go out and invest in? They have their responsibility to take the instructions that's given to them to go and do what the master is expecting of them. 2 of them were found obedient. 1 of them found disobedient to the task. The talents, many scholars make the connection. These are spiritual gifts, and I'm comfortable to go there. But even there, I think we just are chasers of the peripheral things of God, and we miss the primary. We think that somehow we want to have this spiritual gift so we can go to do that with. And I do think that probably is a safe place to make the application. We're not talking about personality. Take your personality and make the best of it. That's not what this is. Take your talents, your skills. You're good with computers. Some would say, go and take that skill and invest it in the kingdom. I'm not saying don't use your skills for that, but that's not what this text is about. these servants do with what the master gives them. And what the master gives them, he expects them to go to work with. It can be probably best understood for us to be these are spiritual gifts, and I'm comfortable to make that application. Cautious, put out the spiritual gift survey in front of us because most spiritual gift surveys are driven more around our personality likes and dislikes than they are about the giftedness of God into our lives. The focus of the text is not, I wonder what spiritual gifts. The emphasis of the text here, the emphasis of the story is God has given you today, and he's expecting you to be at work. Bonhoeffer, you know the name perhaps from World War II, German Lutheran preacher, part of a coup to overthrow Hitler in his day, failed attempt to do so. He is arrested and ordered, one of only, I believe it's 3 or 4 specific people that Hitler ever personally ordered to be executed. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Not to overthrow Hitler, but it's because Dietrich Bonhoeffer never quit preaching the gospel. Even in the day when Lutherans were in Germany, Dietrich Bonhoeffer would not cave in. It's noted that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in just days before his execution was ordered by Adolf Hitler, he wrote these words, and by the grace of God, I believe were preserved for the benefit and the encouragement of the church. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says this: "We live each day as if it were our last, and each day as if there was a great future." I want to read that again because I think it captures the heart of the 2 servants. And it gives the contrast of the other. We live each day as if it were our last day. I'm going to live the last day before he returns. I better get to work now. I can't wait till tomorrow. I must get to the task now, today. We live each day as if it were our last, and each day as if there were a great future. I think there's something to say about the 2 slaves. When their master returned, they were anticipating to meet him, to gather up with him, share with him. You're not going to believe this.